Good morning and welcome to Zicklin Talks Business. I'm Bruce Weber, the Willem Quaker Dean of the Zicklin School of Business. Thank you for joining us for a conversation on one of the most urgent challenges facing communities across the country: how we build more affordable housing at the scale tomorrow demands. Housing affordability is no longer just a big city concern, it's a national constraint on mobility, opportunity, and economic growth. Financing and land costs, lengthy approvals, construction bottlenecks, and resistance to zoning changes all contribute to a system that struggles to meet demand. The problem is complex, yet today's guests will remind us that practical, scalable solutions are within reach when innovation, policy, and pragmatism come together. Larry Zicklin, class of 1957, leads today's discussion with two exceptional Baruch graduates who are shaping the future of housing in the U.S. Victoria Gousse is a principal at AWC, a New York-based real estate investment management firm. With experience across multifamily and mixed-use development, she has delivered projects that balance financial performance with community impact, exemplifying the analytical rigor and civic commitment we value in our alumni. Darren Smith, class of 2008 with his BBA in finance, is president of Smith and Henzy Affordable Group, a leading Florida-based firm specializing in high-quality, community-centered affordable housing. His team has completed multifamily and senior housing projects across the Southeast, leveraging innovative financing and strong municipal partnerships. Darren brings an entrepreneurial, public purpose mindset to every project. Together, Victoria and Darren offer a rare combination of on-the-ground experience and big-picture vision. I'm confident you'll leave today's webinar with a clearer sense of the issues, the models, and the partnerships that can move us forward. We reserve time at the end for audience questions, and please submit those through Zoom's chat feature to my colleague, Associate Dean Gwen Webb. And now I'll turn it over to Larry Zicklin, former CEO and chairman of Neuberger Berman and a valued member of our MBA and undergraduate honors faculty. Larry, let's begin.
Thank you, Bruce. Victoria, I want to start with you, followed by Darren. I would imagine that Baruch never trained either of you to engage in affordable housing. So I'm wondering how you got into this field, and where was your training before you entered it? Victoria, let's start with you.
That's a great question. I was born and raised here in New York City for the most part. As an undergrad, I went to Fordham University. My passion really was in the arts, in the performing arts to be specific. And I was really excited to pursue that while in college. In order to do that, to pursue that kind of work, you need, income to pay for all sorts of things, right? And I was lucky to have a friend of mine who introduced me to a nonprofit called Settlement Housing Fund, where I was offered a marketing role when I was just 18 years old. And that was a very interesting point for me because it turned on my intellectual curiosity. I'd always wanted to do ultimately something in real estate. At the time, I didn't know anything else about real estate other than there are real estate agents who buy and sell homes. And when I started at Settlement Housing Fund had a very interesting program where they were acting as the marketing compliance agents on behalf of developers to help them administer their affordable housing programs. The city was just kicking off this thing called 80/20s. They were large-scale developments in central locations, Midtown, Upper East, Upper West, FIDI, that had 80% market and 20% affordable.
What is FIDI?
Financial district.
I got it.
And the 80/20 programs were 80% market rate, 20% affordable. And I had an opportunity to tour some of these affordable apartments in really luxury developments where, one neighbor would pay $600 a month in rent and the other neighbor would be paying about $3,000 a month in rent. And I really could not understand how these opportunities were available to people. And it really kicked off a lot of questions. And so during my time at Settlement, I wanted to know, how is this possible? What is low-income housing tax credits? Where do they come from? How do they work? How do people qualify for it? And it took me on a very, very long journey across multiple organizations, the 10 years preceding that small internship, to related companies, Jonathan Rose companies, and other large developers, where I was able to do that work in the developer seat. So that's really how I got into this business. You're right, there was no formal education for it. But if you knew about it and had a certain intellectual curiosity, particularly here in New York City, there are certainly many places where you could learn about it.
It speaks to the ability of somebody like you to A, have intellectual curiosity, and B, know a lot of people, one of whom introduced you to an area you weren't thinking of at the moment. Darren, how about you? How did you get into this?
Well, first and foremost, I grew up in affordable housing in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So my affinity to the business is the fact that I actually grew up in it. There are a lot of developers right now in my space that really haven't spent 24 hours in an affordable housing complex, believe it or not. I matriculated into Baruch from Barrow Manhattan Community College. I was a finance major, poli-sci minor. So this business that we're in is in the crossroads between public and private. So my minor and my major kind of made sense. When I graduated Baruch, my goal was to be in public finance. And so I started in the municipal securities division at Citigroup down in Tribeca, trading multifamily revenue bonds. That was during the recession. And I learned about the space through 2 years working on the trading floor. In that phase, what we were trying to do is just effectively buy properties through buying their debt, and then effectively finding an owner operator to sell the property to, and then making a return on our initial investment of buying the bonds. And I did that for 3 years. Then my mom got very, very sick. And so I had to relocate to South Florida. When I relocated to South Florida, Citigroup said, we want to keep you. So instead of being a bond trader, you'll be a banker assisting developers to finance new construction or acquisitions of affordable housing. So in 2010, I relocated from New York to Florida. And for 4 years, I worked as a banker on the front lines, actually financing affordable housing throughout the Eastern Seaboard, primarily, I would say, Mid-Atlantic down in Florida. And then I started my company in 2014 to really focus on my own development pursuits in affordable housing. But I've been in one career my whole life since graduating Baruch, and that's been in affordable housing.
And Darren, how many, and I'm using the word doors because you used it in a prior meeting, how many doors do you complete in a typical year? Or is there a typical year?
So we'll close around 10 transactions every year, deals. So we're averaging anywhere between 750 to 1,000 apartments, either building or acquiring every year. Our portfolio is nearing 8,000, with another 2,000 coming up off the ground as we speak. We're in 5 states: New York, Michigan, Virginia, Maryland, and Florida.
And do you keep track of all 5 states, or do you have somebody that handles some of the other states in addition to you?
Great question. So my business partner, Tim Henzy, he's based in New York, and he manages the Northeast book. We have endeavored in some market rate properties also in Connecticut. So Tim really focuses on the northeastern part of the country, and then my team focuses outside of that. And frankly, Larry, we'll go anywhere. Right now, we're looking at an interesting deal in Omaha, Nebraska, for instance, that could grow legs. We'll see what happens in the next 30 days.
And Victoria, how many doors do you open in a typical year?
My business is somewhat different than Darren's in that we are a capital allocator more than a builder. My role at AWC is to manage commingled funds, separate accounts, and other pools of capital that's structured to invest in multifamily housing. We're not limited to affordable housing. But we happen to understand the space very well, and our investors are typically seeking some type of, whether it's opportunity zone or depreciation benefits, some type of, tax efficient tool to invest in affordable housing. And oftentimes we're able to do mixed income housing, housing that involves property tax abatements or other types of soft subsidies. So it varies. Over the past 3 years since we've launched the firm, we have acquired and or are developing close to 3,200 units across 10 states.
And how difficult is it to secure a reasonable rate of return for the investors in affordable housing?
I think it's increasingly challenging and requires very tailored public-private partnerships in order to achieve true affordable housing. Now, there's something called NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing. This is typically Class B and C assets where the rent is naturally at, let's call it between 60 and 80% of AMI, which is federally the income level that determines whether or not you are low or middle income. So low income would be 60 to 80% of AMI. Every state, every housing agency publishes a schedule of the area median income and the corresponding rents that they consider to be affordable. And so sometimes when we are looking for investments, we look to find assets where we could provide significant value to the tenant and also value for our investors, but where the rents are naturally falling within a place that's affordable, and we don't have to layer so many, often very expensive, very challenging public benefits.
Darren, I was going to ask you, do you find it equally challenging to find reasonable rates of return for your investors?
So our investors are banks, okay? They buy low-income housing tax credits, but the banks are governed by the Community Reinvestment Act. It's a federal act that it's been around for about 40 years. And it says, hey, bank, wherever your deposits are, you have to invest a pro rata portion of those deposits into lower or moderate income communities. And that could be loans, investments, grants. The top driver for banks to meet these CRA federal requirements are through affordable housing, either through lending below market rate interest rates, loans, or investing in tax credits. So these tax credit investors are banks. Their yields are 5%, Larry. They're very low. They get a dollar for dollar federal tax shield for 10 years when they buy the credits. And then they exit the partnership for very little. But again, it's a different investment class that we're talking about here with the banks, because again, there's a federal requirement that they have to show on the books that they're giving back to communities they serve. And the best way to kind of evidence or document that is through investing or loaning into affordable housing. So that yield is somewhere between, I would say, 5 and 7%. It just depends. If it's Berkshire Hathaway, they're at 7.5. If it's Truist Bank, they're at 5.
And the layer to what Darren just said is that it's not just about, and banks, there's several layers of investors. Banks that typically invest in things like low-income housing tax credits, new markets tax credits, et cetera, historic tax credits, they're driven by the tax benefits in those programs more so than any sort of, economic output that the deal itself is going to throw off. And so those yields and the calculation of those yields and the benefit, the ultimate benefit to that investor is different and more driven to the tax benefit than, say, if your investor was a pension fund or a private investment fund.
Right.
And you have responsibilities to all those different types of investors to secure returns appropriate for whatever they demand. So you got a large constituency. How serious is the affordable housing problem today? Is it much different than it was in the past?
So I'll start by just kind of talking about how and I think my other industry colleagues think about the affordable housing shortage. And we think about it in terms of available, largely rental housing for people who are on the lowest income brackets in our cities. So, for example, in the city of New York, extremely low income is around 30% of AMI. And what that means, and I'll give you some numbers. HPD posts these numbers every year. For a single person, that's an income of about $35,000 a year. And affordable has a very specific meaning. Affordable means that you should be paying no more than 30% of your income, adjusted for some things like utilities, towards your housing cost. If you're paying any more than that, you are considered extremely cost burdened. So when we think about the affordable housing shortage, we think about people who are earning 30% of AMI, even up to 60% of AMI. Do they have enough quality housing available to them? And the answer, unequivocally, in every single state is no. There is a great study by the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, along together with other organizations who attempted to calculate this. And they have a map sort of showing the shortage across the country. And in New York, for example, there are 36 affordable homes available for every 100 low-income households. So that's really the gap that we are trying to fill. There's different estimates of how wide the housing shortage is. NAHB says it's about 1.5 million nationwide. Freddie Mac says it's about 3.8 million nationwide. NAR says it's about 5.5 million nationwide. But what we know for sure is that if you are earning 30 to 60% of AMI, there is not enough available high quality housing for you and your family.
Darren, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. First thing, just AMI, just for the audience, means area median income. That's the acronym. So if you hear us say AMI, our business has so many acronyms, we'll throw them out left and right. Just want to make sure everyone's following. Area median income, that's measured on a county by county basis in our country. So every county has a different AMI range. I think that things have changed in affordable housing in terms of what's important. Right now, the two factors I would say is it's becoming more and more expensive for young individuals to live where they work. Every major city the rents are very, very high, and it's becoming very, very difficult. So there's a lot of commute time. You're starting to see people commute an hour sometimes to get to work and an hour back. And then depending on traffic, it could be 2 hours. So I think that there needs to be a heightened focus on live local. So you live where you work. And there are programs coming out, but I think we need to focus on that first and foremost. I think on the baby boomer side, you're seeing a large amount of people who are retiring, who now their income will be either pensions or Social Security, and inflation has moved in a direction that is effectively lowering the purchasing power of those pensions and Social Security. So an elderly demographic can no longer rent and quality housing. So our focus as Smith & Henzy is twofold. It's one, let's build workforce affordable housing in major cities so young adults can live where they work and they can cut their commute time. Okay, and let's do that by trying to access government land, city land, it's low basis, which allows us to do that. And then secondly, let's create quality, affordable housing for the elderly demographic, 62 plus, where they can literally age in place. Let's make these properties and these buildings ADA up to code. Let's have all walk-in showers, for instance, not tubs where it becomes increasingly more and more difficult to enter into a tub. Let's do things that really allow an elderly demographic to age in place. and be here forever and have a good amenity package for that as well.
Is there some reason why the elderly that are thinking of downsizing have difficulty selling their homes? Are mortgage rates different? Or is it a matter of young people not being able to afford the monthly tab?
Yeah, I think it's a function of a couple of things, okay? And it depends on every geographic location. There are pressure, stress points geographically, but I'll speak to my geography, Florida. You have insurance premiums rate going through the roof. Okay, so it's becoming harder and harder to own a house and to pay for insurance. Wind coverage is becoming more and more expensive. That's the first thing. Second, you know that obviously the interest rate environment is going to effectively uh, act as an impediment for you to lever enough money to be able to acquire the house. That happens as well. And then I would say the last thing are the HOA fees in some of these condos downtown. I mean, these maintenance fees right now are equal to a mortgage payment. And why? Because inflation. It's utility expenses, it's your maintenance costs. It's just inflation is driving up these maintenance fees. In Florida, the country club fees. And so it's becoming more and more, your cost to carry is just too large when you factor in insurance, maintenance, HOAs, and then throw in the fact that you have to put more equity into a property now because you can support less debt due to interest rates.
Victoria, the numbers you gave us before are the various estimates of housing needs. Does this mean that for the last 20 or 30 years, we've been underbuilding?
I think it's a complicated question. I do think we've been underbuilding, but the issue of supply is and the affordability is both a function of the supply of housing that's out there. And in New York City, for example, where we had somewhat restrictive housing codes that hadn't been updated for a long time, we have, density restrictions in certain areas. You have very high cost of land, which makes it so that when you are building, it typically only makes sense to build higher end or condo type of product, therefore leaving out homeowners or renters at the lowest income brackets. So a combination of policy and economic drivers are making it so that you have less supply, and the supply that you have is less and less affordable. And it's the combination of those two that I believe is truly exacerbating the issue. Now, I do want to point out that in the city of New York, in December of 2024, the City of New York passed a regulation called the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. It was one of the biggest updates to the zoning code since the 1960s when it was first enacted. And there was a very serious push to try to address this issue. One, by being able to build larger, denser buildings. Two, making it a lot easier, sort of relaxing the building code in such a way that office to residential conversions could be more possible. And by the way, since they've done that, there have been thousands of units converted from office to residential. Some of the largest projects right now, there's one happening on 42nd Street on the east side, close to 1,500 units, all at once. It's this relaxation.
Well, that's a conversion.
It's a conversion, yeah, but it's essentially the creation without having to build a new building. You're creating new housing units, and very often the way that these buildings floor plates and just general construction as an office building made it very difficult to comply with residential codes. So they've relaxed some of those building codes to date, and they've also introduced certain tax abatement programs like 45X and 467M, which are meant to provide financial viability to projects that have affordable housing mandates. So really pushing builders to, the city is saying you can build more if you do build more and you need a bonus, you will have to incorporate affordable housing. That is the housing that is available to the lowest income households. So there's a lot of mixed income, and then we'll provide a tax abatement program to facilitate, to make these projects financially viable so that you can get a construction loan and provide,
Hey,
private equity
let me
return.
just ask, is a conversion a less expensive way of putting a family into affordable housing than new construction?
Unfortunately, Larry, not necessarily. I do think that what conversions allow is what Darren was describing, um, accessing land and accessing properties in highly accessible locations that provide economic opportunity to people. So it would have been very difficult to find a parcel of dirt in Midtown that can accommodate 1,500 units. And if you did, it would have been very expensive to assemble. But because of this ability to acquire at a lower basis an office building and convert it, it just creates the opportunity in a place where it's highly desirable. Not necessarily less expensive. I think on a per unit basis, it costs just as much. The retrofit costs are very high. The costs of labor are very high. If you're utilizing certain tax abatement programs, you're going to be subject to prevailing wage requirements, which further exacerbates the cost. So I don't think you're saving much by way of cost per unit built, but you are getting opportunity that would not have been there otherwise.
Darren, is the work from home syndrome that we're going through since COVID demanding larger living spaces for families because you have to set aside some area to work from home? Does that make a difference in the housing demand?
I'm not seeing that. Really, what makes a difference is the common area spaces and making sure you design the common area spaces in a way where people that work from home can work in the common area spaces and have privacy, but not so much on the unit sizes. And then on the conversion piece, I did an interesting deal in Aventura, Miami last year where we converted an assisted living facility that was failing because the ALF model is failing because it's too costly to run. And so the rents are too high. And so families can't afford to put their loved ones in ALFs anymore. So they're failing across the board. So I think there's going to be more opportunities to convert these ALFs into affordable 62 plus elderly communities. And so I bought a property in Aventura, Miami, 220 units, purchased it last year and converted it from an ALF to an independent living facility. We're doing about $100,000 a door of rehab to it. It's in a great area in Aventura, like right on the intercoastal. And I think there's going to be more opportunities like that are going to present themselves because the ALF model, again, small unit sizes, so they bode well for independent living facilities for a 62 plus community.
Are cities and neighborhoods willing to make zoning changes to accommodate low-income, affordable housing?
I think you're starting to see that trend. I can speak to Florida. We passed the Live Local Act. That was passed 18 months ago. And basically with that act, I mean, there are a lot of pro-affordable provisions within that act, but a couple of them in terms of what you're discussing is one, if you're zoned commercial, industrial, or residential in the state of Florida, and you want to convert that property to affordable housing, as of right, you can convert it and change the use. Don't have to have any approvals from the local municipality to do so. And then in terms of how high can you develop the building, they look at a radius between 0.5 and a mile, depending on where you are in the state. And the tallest building within that radius, that's basically your height max. And so I just received a call actually this weekend on a Golden Corral in Boynton Beach. I can develop, it's on about 4 acres in a great area. And the owner wants to sell it, and I can, as of right, build affordable housing on there. Now, I need to be able to cobble my sources of funds together to make it work. But from a zoning perspective, there are no more impediments. I can zone it as of right affordable. As long as I'm going to put a 99-year deed restriction on the property that says I have to rent it at 60% of air median income tenants or less.
Victoria, are you seeing relaxations in the zoning requirements?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, there are a number of cities across the country that have shown real effort in trying to relax zoning codes in such a way that they can really provide significant additional supply of housing to their cities. And that comes through, both reducing or eliminating FAR or attaching affordability mandates to it. Like in LA, there's been a program called ED1 that's sort of accelerated approvals for projects that have affordable housing components or provide significant density or supply to certain areas. The addition of the introduction of ADUs, accessory dwelling units to single family residential plots. There's a handful of things that we're seeing, even, tax abatement programs for new supply of housing. We've certainly seen at the federal level the relaxation of bond financing rules, the increase of volume cap for a bond for low-income housing tax credits for almost every state across the nation. The expansion of the Opportunity Zone program, which is it's largely meant for other types of economic development, but it's being utilized in housing very frequently. So we're seeing a number of efforts, both at the federal level and at the local level, to increase supply and provide greater opportunities for public-private partnerships.
So when you assemble some acreage to build, how long does it take to get a building permit?
Oof, that's a good question. I mean,
or does it depend on area?
I'll give you just a concrete example. I worked on a project in Jersey City. It was a commercial to residential conversion in a historic structure. It took us almost a year to get permits. We had to go through the water authority first, and then we had to go through the planning and zoning board, and then had to go through historic, which took a very long time, and then back to the Department of Buildings, multiple rounds of plan reviews. One plan reviewer didn't remember what the other plan reviewer said. Just a lot of administrative burden. And at the same time, you have your cost of capital that's sort of racking up, and tremendous amount of spend on consultants and expediters along the way. That's just one notable example. I do know that there are some cities where they're trying to do better in expediting these approvals, but it's largely very challenging.
Darren, is it just as challenging where you're operating?
I would say generally in Florida, it would take 6 months from when you submit your design drawings complete, assuming you're not having to do any rezoning, no variance approvals, like for instance, for parking, just as of right, clean site, 6 months. Outside of everywhere but for Miami, city of Miami could be 12 months. You have to go through many more departments there. So it's between 12 and 6, I would say, normally on the permitting side.
So all during this period, inflation continues to take place, your costs are rising, and eventually it shows up in what you have to charge or what the rate of return is to the investors.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to mitigate that some volatility risk, I would say, that we enact. First, we index lock. So I'll index lock my perm rate, 6 months before I close. So I take that risk off the table. God forbid, you spend $1 million on a site and then the treasury balloons, 300 basis points and your deal goes sideways. So usually before I go hard on my deposits, hard being non-refundable on my deposits, I'll try to take as much risk off the table personally as I can. So what does that mean? That means I'm going to lock my index. Freddie Mac allows me to lock my index. I'm going to buy out my GC contract well in advance. I'm going to lock in my material costs. I'm going to make sure
When you
that,
say buy out your GC contract, tell me what that means.
sure. So our GC contracts are a guaranteed max price. Okay. GC is saying, I'm going to deliver your project at this price, right? But then they have carve out language, exclusionary language for material cost inflations, for instance. And we saw that during COVID, that we saw a large amount of cost increases. So what we do typically to take that risk off the table of that volatility of pricing materials, we start to buy out the contract. We start to have the GC actually sign subs, lock in material orders well before we close on the deal. Usually when I close on a deal, my entire general contract is 90% bought out, meaning I've already locked in my material costs, already paid for my material costs, locked in my subs. So there's no price volatility embedded within that GC contract. The only time I'm going to get a cost or a change order would be for scope changes, but not for price changes.
Okay. And let me ask both of you, in the United States, we become more efficient over time because of technology. Has technology changed the way you build or refurbish homes, apartments, so that you make it less expensive these days and it becomes more efficient to do both of those?
I would say, Larry, that I think there's a lot of people working on that problem, but our industry, specifically the construction industry, has not seen very many technological advances. It still takes the same amount of time for a mason to build the brick wall as it would have taken them 100 years ago, right? I will say that there are some optimistic construction methods that are available, such as modular construction, that some developers have started to use. You're starting to see some traction across some projects. This is where the units are largely prefabricated off-site and then brought back to the site and assembled. And this is really timing efficiency. This cuts down the time by 40%-ish, right? I have a project in LA where we're with a joint venture partner and a modular builder. They're building 290 units of 100% affordable housing, largely smaller units, one bedroom, studios, a couple twos, concrete podium construction. And my construction timeline is about 18 months. I'm building a similar project in New York.
What would it ordinarily be if it were not modular?
A similar project I'm building in New York, although that building is much larger in scale, but that's a 36-month construction timeline.
And does modular contribute to the diminution in time?
100%. That's the goal. That's the goal. So I think, at the moment,
I just want to ask you one question. Is it inferior housing, modular?
No, it's really a methodology, right? You're not doing, rebar and doing your conventional type of construction. You're constructing them offsite, and your level of finish, the level of like interior finishes really depends on you and your budget. It doesn't change whether it's modular or not. Just from a risk perspective, from a timing perspective, that would generally be the impact.
So let me ask you a question, both of you. If you could change just one lever of housing that would make a discernible difference in what you're able to build, how rapidly, and at what price, what would that be? What would you like to see? What's the most important change you'd like to see made? What would help you the most?
In order to build these more efficiently
More
from a cost
affordable
perspective.
housing.
I mean, if I'll jump in first. I mean, I think that similar to what we're seeing now in Florida, I mean, I think there needs to be more state assistance, expediting permits, tax abatements, relaxed zoning to allow us to do this. So I think like a global deregulation would be helpful. A lot of my projects, for instance, are redevelopment of public housing, which is federally owned land. And when you do that, it triggers what we call Davis-Bacon wages, which are like union wages, which depending on where you are in the state or in the country, that can be 35% cost increase alone. I think that if you want to build more affordable housing, we all agree we have to make it more efficient cost perspective. Part of that is deregulating and allow us to not have to adhere to Davis-Bacon wages, for instance. Allow me to build without having to go union. That'll be helpful. Allow me to build a property and not have to go union on the actual maintenance of the building after. In New York, a lot of times, depending on the source of money we get, we have unions within the building, and that makes the OpEx higher, which means makes your NOI lower, which means your permanent loan is lower. And so as a result, you build less units because you lever less funds.
Victoria, do you agree with that, or do you have some other suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the biggest challenges, look, we know that there are certain programs that have been consistently delivering affordable housing throughout the years. And those are largely the work that's done at HUD, and the low-income housing tax credit program, which has delivered hundreds of thousands of affordable housing units in the past 30, 40 years. And a series of other local programs. And right now, our biggest challenge is the uncertainty around the continuance of funding, especially for things like project-based Section 8, local Section 8 program, tenant vouchers. These are all tools that tenants and developers alike rely very heavily on in order to sustain the existing supply of affordable housing and create new affordable housing. So, for us, we'd like to see this funded with the same vigor that the Defense Department is funded, right? Because it's a fundamental core need in our society, and having HUD funded consistently, or our rental assistant programs funded consistently, certain grant and energy sustainability programs that keep us providing sustainable housing to households. These are the things that will help us continue to do good work and to deliver affordable housing consistently year after year.
So let me ask both of you, is there some city or some state that has, I won't say solved the problem, but on the road to solving the problem that you could point to and say, we should model ourselves after this city or this state? Is there any such thing?
Larry, I think the problem is what we're seeing across the country is that every state is taking a slightly different approach to addressing the problem based on the resources that they have available and, honestly, the political will of their local leaders. One thing that we can point to is that cities that have done a good job of increasing the supply of housing, some of them have seen a resulting flattening or even reduction in rents and costs of housing over the past 5 years.
And you're talking about general housing, not affordable housing.
I'm talking about, yes, general housing,
okay.
Right? These numbers are not bifurcated between affordable housing and general housing. And by the way, in all affordable housing communities, that the rent is preset. It is established based on that person's income, and it adjusts from year to year based on a cost of living index. But these rents are artificially lower, right? So you have to qualify for this. For everything else, they're considered market rents. And even what I described earlier is naturally occurring affordable housing. This is unregulated housing. But unregulated housing is very important because it's what's most accessible to an individual. And so in the city of Austin, for example, over the past 10 years, you've seen significant regulation at the local level to increase zoning density, to accelerate permits, to allow ADUs on single family lots. There's a handful of I think what the industry have found very helpful regulation tax abatement programs that have created significant amount of housing supply over the last few years. And what we've seen, and I think the number in 2025 was that rents in Austin have gone down about 7.5%, right? So that means that you're seeing a city where rent growth is flattening or even decreasing, making the existing stock of unregulated housing somewhat more affordable to those who could not afford it before. And these are the incremental changes that we think that if they're applied across the country, people will start to see real relief. And so typically, as your income goes up, you would think that the existing supply of housing becomes more and more accessible to you. But in many cities, the cost of housing is going up so exponentially that even as your income is coming up, you're finding high quality housing more and more out of reach. And that's the effort that I think we're trying to scale back a bit through some of these regulations.
Darren, how would you answer that question as to a city that you think has largely or somewhat solved the problem?
I mean, I'm biased, but this Live Local Act that was passed 18 months ago in Florida is a game changer for us. All of our properties now, for the most part, are off the tax roll for affordable housing, so I'm able to support a higher perm loan amount to create more affordable housing. The zoning changes are critical to be able to change as of right. And then the last thing that they did is they created a $500 million pot of subordinate debt financing, 3% interest only. We have to apply to it every year at the state level, but we can use that money and we can layer that behind the first mortgage with the tax credit equity and build affordable housing. So that Live Local, the Live Local Act that was passed is doing a myriad of things in Florida. And the reason why they're doing it is because everyone's moving here. We have a large immigrant class that are moving here, and we need more affordable housing so that we can continue to service these big cities appropriately. And so that's why they call it the Live Local Act, because they want people that are working here to live here and to continue to want people to move here.
Is there enough skilled labor in and around the United States now to build the amount of affordable housing we need?
I mean, so we're also a general contractor. Failed to mention that. So my perspective is going to be now not as the developer, but as a general contractor that we have. I mean, for us down here, yes, we have enough skilled labor.
And let me ask,
it's difficult because when you have Davis-Bacon jobs, we have a lot of Davis-Bacon jobs. All of our skilled labor have to have Social Security numbers, so that makes it hard sometimes, right?
are you losing some skilled labor because of the immigration sweeps that are going on?
Not as much as you'd think,
Okay.
believe it or not. But it also doesn't impact me as much because most of my jobs I have to have workers that have Social Security numbers because that's what the federal government requires me to have. So I see it less as a result.
Yeah, I think specifically to trades like electricians, plumbers. I mean, these are heavily regulated folks that need to be licensed. So you see a little bit less in the skilled trade department.
It's usually drywall painting is where you'll see it.
Yeah.
Let me ask one more thing. There's what I consider a myth around that tenants in affordable housing maintain the properties less well than those in unsubsidized housing. Is there any truth to that?
Absolutely not. I will say that unequivocally. Being a landlord is is a responsibility, and also screening and intaking residents is a very particular skill. And I think in order to, when you have a multifamily building, whether it's affordable or market rate, I think there has to be a very specific standard around tenant and tenant quality that has to be consistent across all types of assets. I think the landlords that do a very good job of that see a lot less challenge when it comes to their sort of underlying tenant base. One thing I will say is that that's certainly the perception, particularly when it comes to things like insurance and being able to procure insurance, and lenders and other parties thinking about the loss factor or the risk across these properties. It's certainly, from my perspective, a somewhat discriminatory point of view that many people, particularly the insurance industry, holds, which makes it very challenging for some of us to do business.
Darren, do you agree with that?
Not necessarily. I think that we experience a ton. I mean, I think that there's less recourse in affordable housing with tenants relative to security deposits, relative to evictions. We've had a lot of, and we've seen it a lot in DC, in New York, where you can't, tenants know that they don't have to pay the rent and they won't get evicted, or it'll take them 18 months. And we're starting to see, and it's to the point now where Freddie Mac and banks won't even go to DC. They have paused when we have a New York City project. They want to look at our receivables or accounts receivables, because the receivables are large. Because what happened during COVID and coming out of COVID was that there were tenants that just weren't paying rents. They weren't getting evicted. The eviction process could take 2 years. So now you have a unit that you have no rent, no income for, and then everyone talks and everyone starts to follow pursuit. And before you know it, you're cutting checks. The developer's cutting checks every month to cover the OpEx of a building because of that. So it just depends. I mean, there's no recourse there on the credit side, right? They're not concerned about the credit side as much as maybe somebody in a market rate project would be. So it just depends. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, we have 8,000 units, so we see across 5 states. I see I could give you a lot of stories. I don't think we have enough time for these stories.
Yeah, landlords certainly have a burden when it comes to tenant screening. The level of fraud that we see in the marketplace, particularly people fabricating pay stubs and other identifying information to show that they're qualified for housing when they're not, is significant. So, back to my point, earlier part of this discussion, which is that you have as a landlord leasing housing to the general public, you have a very, you just have to be very specific about how you screen tenants to make sure that you have the right people in your development.
And is the technology for screening tenants improving?
No, it's really a property manager. I mean, well, first and foremost, screening tenants. I mean, they're going to submit an application and you're going to run a credit check, right? So you're going to see on the credit side, right? That's always the case, credit check. Then if the property manager is really good, they're going to look at the last 3 places they've stayed and call, right? Which doesn't happen all the time. And then that's how you figure it out. So for us, for instance, DC, we're doing some deals in Maryland right now, which is on the DC border. I'm terrified of DC, because DC, I have friends that have buildings that are fully occupied, but they're only receiving rent for 50%, and they're cutting checks every day because of that, because they can't evict because it takes too long, and people know the case. That's what's happening. So you have to have a property manager really do deep dives, and we require property managers to do that. I would tell you, juxtapose that with Florida, I can evict somebody in less than 60 days.
And does the DC local government understand what's going on?
Now they do.
Are they working with you?
They do now. They do now when capital has left the city. Freddie Mac will not lend to DC. Fannie Mae will not lend to DC, because all of their red flags within the portfolio are in DC in the Mid-Atlantic. New York's not as bad, but it's not good either. I mean, I have about 1,000 apartments in the city, and I would tell you that, it's a struggle. It's a struggle.
And is New York also slow on the eviction process?
100%, 12 months, could be 18 months. And sometimes you reset it. So meaning you'll go through the eviction process, the judges say fine, and then the city will give an emergency rental relief to the tenant. After the 12 months, they get it, and then you restart the process again because now the next month they don't pay, and I got to go through the 12 months again.
Is institutional? I'm sorry, go ahead, Victoria.
Larry, I think we are coming to the end of the hour, and as usual, I hate to interrupt.
Please.
Especially this last discussion. There are a number of questions. Given the late time, though, I'd like to focus back on our current students. What skills and career paths are most useful for those students if they would like to carve out a career that deals in whatever way with housing affordability? Victoria first, maybe, and then Darren.
I'm sorry, I missed that question. I think my screen froze out for a second.
What advice would you give to current students if they would like to carve out a career path in the area that touches on housing affordability in any of its areas, which could be legal, it could be tax, it could be accounting, it could be developing, it could be real estate. But what advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's you pointed it out. There's a number of different professions within this industry that will, give you access or just kind of take a different angle to helping to solve the affordable housing issue. From design professionals to builders to lawyers and accountants, sustainability experts, engineers, et cetera. It's certainly a wide range of professions. I think it really just takes intellectual curiosity, understanding at least locally what is happening in affordable housing, who your local electeds are, who the players are, what issues your cities are facing, so that you could sort of position yourself to help solve those problems locally.
Darren, could you add to that?
I mean, I would say first and foremost, Baruch used to have an affordable housing class. It was very good. I'm not sure if they still have it. I would say from my perspective, what's made me good in this business is finance and accounting. Took a lot of finance and accounting. And that helped me and has helped me and continues to help me in affordable housing. Affordable housing is very complex in the capital stack. You deal with a lot of financial modeling. So having business acumen or finance acumen is important, I would say. So the second thing is understanding the asset classes. There's so many elements of real estate, from market to affordable to commercial, you name it. So if you're interested about real estate, learn about the asset classes, figure out which one you want to get into. And then the last thing I would say is what helped me is working at a bank first, working at a bank within real estate. It helped shape my hard and soft skill sets. And then eventually I started my own company as a result of it. So I think that the main takeaway here, though, is be an entrepreneur, own equity. Real estate allows you to do that. And it's if you're in my space, you can do that in addition to doing good to society. And so it's the best of both worlds. So be entrepreneurial in your pursuits and go and get after it.
Thank you. I'd like to ask one last question, and again to both of you, Victoria, and you, Darren. Do you feel optimistic or pessimistic that we, as a nation, will be able to build the affordable housing over the next 5, 10, 15 years that clearly is needed?
It's bipartisan. I'm optimistic. We just had major pro affordable housing provisions passed this last year, and it's bipartisan. Both aisles like it for different reasons. It will always be here. The tax credit program will always be in place. So yeah, I'm very long the business. The business isn't going anywhere. We see, I mean, over the last 30 years, there's been a 30% increase in population. So I think that the demand's going to continue to be there. That population is primarily infused by people coming in that need affordable housing. So I think we'll continue to follow suit that way as well over the next 30 years. And the key is just building clean, affordable housing in cities where people can live and work, period.
I agree.
Victoria, do you?
I'm very optimistic, and there's a tremendous amount of motivation on both sides of the aisle. I mean, during Obama, he introduced RAD, which was huge in helping the country address their aging public housing stock, still being developed today. During the first Trump administration, there was a Tax and Jobs Act that introduced opportunity zones. During the Biden administration, there was infrastructure regulation that helped provide so much capital for transit-oriented development. During the second Trump administration, there was additional regulation that helped relax and expand our ability to do low-income housing tax credit transactions and permanently expanded the opportunity zone. So every administration, whether Democrat or Republican, you're seeing really strong, solid policies passed and tools that's giving the industry more tools to do their jobs. So I'm very optimistic.
Thank you both. We are very much out of time. Larry, do you have any last comments?
No, I appreciate our two guests, and I appreciate Victoria and Darren enormously. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you for having us.
I'd like to add one closing note. Our next webinar is on March 10th. It is on shareholder democracy, and the question is it enhanced or diminished by the new executive order on proxy voting? Larry's guests will be Professor Sonali Hazarika and Professor Leni Kostovetsky. Both are finance professors in the Zicklin School of Business, Economics, and Finance Department. So we'll see you back on March 10th, and thank you all for participating.